You saw the title and thumbnail, so we're just going to quickly talk about ways that you should change how you think if you're thinking about transitioning to Pathfinder from D&D if you're on the fence. This video will help you know like the big differences and how you have to approach the game. Because on the surface they're very similar, both being fantasy, somewhat crunchier, because D&D is still on the crunchy side of tabletop role-playing games as a whole, dungeon crawling fantasy games, and that rely on skills to do other things and blah blah blah. So, with that, let's just get right into point number one. And that first thing is that this is a team game. And you can see this just in the class design itself. So if I go into Character Creation on Archives and Ethos, which is a website that has all the Pathfinder information, I can go to Classes, I can go into Fighter, and I'm just going to take a look at the Fighter feats. Because you'll notice things like Combat Assessment, that just gives you knowledge of enemies, which is more useful for your spellcasters in your team. It includes things like Snagging Strike, which makes an enemy flat-footed not to just you, but to your entire team. It also comes with Combat Grab, Brutish Shove, Assisting Shot, which, all are these team buff abilities. So, it's very, very easy for even a usually traditionally selfish class like Fighter to have team boosting abilities. Where if you compare that to the D&D Fighter, and I go into the Fighter section on D&D Beyond, because this is the only legal source for D&D 5e stuff, I go to Fighter, and we can see that from their base features, they have a fighting style, only one of which is really considered to be a support ability. A lot of these are selfish because they only buff your character. Second Wind is selfish, Axe Surge selfish. Not all subclasses are entirely selfish, but most are. So you really have a character that is not providing a lot of utility to your party by picking a fighter. You're just kind of yourself, where you look at the Pathfinder fighter, or any of the Pathfinder version of these classes, and you will see that they have a lot of feats that are there to support a team, and a lot of builds involve team play strategies. My stuff like the dual wield fighter and the great weapon archery fighters have a little bit less of that, but still, you can get a lot of utility crammed on even your martial characters, so even if you are a damage character, you will have utility and you will have stuff to be doing to buff your team. And that also means you'll need to rely on your team a little bit more because the game is balanced around this idea of you will help each other. And this also means that your characters are likely to be less of like the whole package. Because you can look at the D&D fighter again, and you can see they have Second Wind, which they can self-heal without any additional feats, any additional things. They can just self-heal with this ability here. And if you want to do this on a Pathfinder fighter, you'd need to go into Medicine and get Battle Medicine, which is also a support ability, in order to self-heal. So the D&D fighter doesn't need to rely on its team as much, but every single Pathfinder class needs to rely on each other in order to get the full amount of value from them. I personally think it's a good thing, but it is something to note about this game, that it does rely more on team play and team strategies. The next thing I'm going to touch on is, of course, balance, and how balance is correlated with difficulty. So, a thing to note about this game is that Pathfinder is balanced so that all classes, when played well, are about equal in power. You may think that's a good or a bad thing, because like when I explain that to people, they initially go, that seems dumb, because in their mind, playing a harder class should give more benefit, because you're putting in effort, so you should get reward from that effort. But in Pathfinder, Pathfinder says the reward is simply having a more complex and likely more interesting play pattern, and being able to describe a more advanced type of character. And a great example of this is actually if you look at the Rogue and the Investigator. They fill a similar niche of skill-based dexterity martials, but the main difference is that the Rogue is the easier one to play. It's a bit more general in what its abilities are trying to do. It just needs the enemy to be flat-footed. And it tends to have a higher damage per round threshold, just because that's an easier condition to meet. Where the Investigator gets to pre-roll things, has a lot more tricks that can play with the action economy, and has other strange benefits coming off the sides of it involving recall knowledge, maybe battle medicine, other things. So they end up both being about the same power level if played well. Rogue is easier, but that does not make it more powerful. Now if you compare that to something like Dungeons & Dragons, a lot of people will tell you that if you look at the classes, they are not made equally. Because if you know what you're doing, Wizard is the best class in the game. And the way you would deal with this as a martial is you pick up a bow and do your one build that you can realistically manage to then be able to keep up, because it's a game all about resource expenditure and blah blah blah. And so 5e is balanced around, if you know what you're doing, you will be rewarded with a stronger character and be able to be more powerful and blah blah. Pathfinder, again, is not really doing that. So that means you can have your min-maxer player and your person that's just there because they like the NPC's voice, have them sit down at the same table, and still have a good game where one does not feel completely overshadowed by the other. Now, Pathfinder characters can be stronger or weaker than each other, but as long as nobody's actively trying to handicap their build, and, like, they have good scores in their important stats, like, your spellcasters should have a high casting stat, your marshals should have a high attacking stat. As long as you do that, you should be fine. And your classes and characters won't deviate than more than 10 to 15% power level from each other. And they're going to be doing different things anyway if they're building the party well. So nobody should be overwhelmed by another character. And I think that is an upside. However, this does feed back into you have less of a power fantasy of, oh, I've now mastered the game, so now I'm going to go build my super strong character and smash through everything. That's not really how Pathfinder2e works. So that is something that you're going to need to unlearn. And because everything is balanced, there's also these tags for uncommon, rare, etc. And that just means it's less common in the world, and some GMs may ban it from their game. So, like, all the uncommon and rare stuff is stuff your GM might pre-ban from the game. So, like, all resurrection spells are uncommon. All the resurrection rituals are uncommon. Because some GMs might want to play in a setting that doesn't have resurrection. So then they can just say, oh, for any uncommon item, ask me, I'll say no if it involves resurrecting. And the GM can just know they're going to catch all of it. And if you don't want characters to be playing guns or weird constructy thingies, they're labeled uncommon or rare, so the player would ask the GM then has the ability to say no or make it work within the setting. So it doesn't come with the pre-built bias of everything should be allowed all the time. And content from later books of Pathfinders actually tends to be a little bit weaker than the base book stuff, just by how things shake out, or a lot more difficult to get the full value from, which generally means weaker because it's harder to get full value from that type of thing. But it's not so bad that you can't bring, like, a psychic to a table with a fighter. It's all the classes are perfectly fine in an adventuring party together. It may be a slight difference, and that differs class to class, but, like, meh, whatever. And now we need to talk about items. Anyway, my cat is currently crawling around, so I'll be occasionally lifting her up to the camera. So, in Pathfinder, you are expected to be getting magic items, and a lot of them, and starting pretty early on. +1 weapons in Pathfinder are a level 2 item. And you can buy them at normal stores for designated prices that are all just, like, listed in the book. There is no, like, oh, well, common items are this much, rare items are this much, and they should be rarely given out because they can severely affect the balance of the game. Pathfinder's balanced around magic items. You should give your parties magic items for playing Pathfinder, and if you don't want to do that, you're going to want to look into variant rules like the automatic bonus progression. Automatic bonus progression, which is a variant rule that basically has all the numerical boosting magic items get turned into this table here. And with this table here, you can know what the game's expecting people to have in terms of, like, number boosting items. And you can use this as, like, a guideline for what items to give out from the treasure by level table. D&D is a lot more loose with how you should be doing loots, what you should be doing with magic items. It just notes that, oh, if you give your party a lot of magic items, it's probably going to break things. So they should be rare. But there's no real way to reward a party with loot other than, like, giving your strength-based character a suit of full plate, which is also a level 2 item in Pathfinder 2, because that's how it is. Where in 5e, you kind of, level 5, you've saved up enough to buy your suit of full plate armor, you get your full plate armor, and you're just kind of like, well, now what? And you don't really end up with a lot of areas to spend your gold, where in Pathfinder, every single piece of gold really matters. And you as a GM can know what items you should give your players, because Every item has a level. We'll see that all of them have their own prices, their own level that they're recommended for a party, and that's also the crafting for exit level, so that party cannot get access to high-level items without the GM knowing. So you can see stuff like Grand Clocks are third-level items, Infiltrator Thieves tools are third-level items, Brace Missile Deflection, just like, it tells you exactly where things are, and there are great guidelines for building these. So you can homebrew, and you can fit it within the balanced guidelines, because the balanced guidelines are right there in front of you, and you can read them. And I might make a video on how to homebrew stuff that's a bit out of scope for this video, but definitely can be done in this game. And you should give your party items. I'm going to keep on saying that because I've seen a lot of GMs go, how much do I give my players? I say go start at the treasure by level chart, and then I like to dial it up a little bit further, because I think the game is more fun when party members can start experimenting with what they want to do, and have that extra gold to buy items that are good character building items, but maybe not the best for combat, and it gives them that room to have their combat items and then a little bit extra. So, I'll go a little bit beyond this. The next big difference is that not everything is resource-based, because if you look at 5e abilities, you can see Second Wind, once you use this feature, you must finish a short or long rest before you can use it again. You can see Action Surge, which requires you to take a short rest before you can use it again. And then you can look at the Pathfinder fighter. Almost none of its feats have a limitation like that. It's all just like an action cost, and maybe some requirements you need to meet before you can use the action. And they're all balanced by taking up feats, and without customization. So there isn't a whole lot of resource grind. And that can be jarring, especially when they look at treat wounds and think, this is far too good to be true. There's no way you can full heal out of combat and then have it be spammable, but yes you can. That's how the game's made. Because encounters are designed to be threatening when you are full health. So not being at full health is like running into a boss fight at half HP, basically. You wouldn't do that in a video game, and you shouldn't do that here. In 5e, you're expected to constantly be draining the party of resources, have a specific amount of encounters per day, and it's not just the spellcasters, but the marshals too that are being drained. In Pathfinder 2, only your spellcasters with their spell slots are being drained, because after the remaster you'll be able to have unlimited refocuses, so it's just the actual slot spells that are going to be consumed. And as you're getting to low-level casters, you'll notice that their cantrips are still very damaging. And as they start going to the higher levels, they'll have a lot of lower-level slots that are still very useful. So casters still have a very, very strong resource-light plan, in addition to the resource-heavy plan where they can do a bunch of other cool stuff. Where all the marshals have their cool stuff as the action cost and the way that they need to get in and move. So there isn't as much of regret of, oh man, I blew Action Surge but I didn't really need it this fight, man, I feel like an idiot. And more of, okay, so I got my combat grade off, didn't really need that, I maybe should have done this other action instead. And all of the decision-making in Pathfinder 2e is brought into a closer timescale of itself. Which means, in combat, there are more penalties for things like going down. And fewer penalties for things like, oh, well, we didn't play that fight 3 rooms ago properly. So all the penalties for your immediate actions are more immediate instead of being pushed back later in the adventuring day like they would be in a 5e game. So you have to shift the mindset to be, I'm not really playing a game about burning resources anymore. I'm playing a game where all my creatures are actually playing to win. And now, let's actually move on to talking about those creatures, because fights are scary in this game. Let's just quickly start going over what makes Pathfinder combat so deadly with going over what 5e's encounters do. So 5e has these pre-written difficulties for what its encounters are. And an easy counter is a counter that doesn't tax characters' resources or put them in serious peril. They might lose a few hit points, but victory is pretty much guaranteed. Alright? Medium. 1 or 2 scary moments for the players, but the characters should emerge victorious with no casualties. 1 or more of them might need to use healing resources. So this one is basically saying, one of them might need to heal, maybe. Cool. A hard encounter could go badly. Weaker characters might get taken out of the fight, and there's a slim chance that 1 or more characters might die. And a deadly encounter could be lethal for 1 or more players, Survival often requires good tactics and quick thinking, and the party risks defeat. Let's go check how those labels look in Pathfinder, because Pathfinder is an equivalent labels based on XP thresholds. And that is up here. So it starts with trivial. So easy that the characters essentially have no chance of losing. They shouldn't even need to send significant resource unless they are particularly wasteful. Fair enough. Low threat. Typically use some of the party's resources. However, it'd be rare or the result very poor text for the entire party to be threatened. Low threat is already mentioned that a character can be threatened, potentially. Moderate threats are serious challenge to the characters, though unlikely to overpower them completely. Characters usually need to use sound tactics to manage the resources wisely to come out of a moderate threat encounter ready to continue on. That's kind of like what Deadly is saying. Pathfinder's moderate is very close in feel to 5e's Deadly encounters. So if you're a GM coming in from 5e, you might go, well, my players are doing pretty well. I'll throw Severe Encounter with a little bit extra at them. Because they're used to that being how you balance 5e. Because in 5e, if you're having a shorter adventuring day, you might want to throw in a few Deadly encounters just to like burn the resource and get them actually like thinking. Severe threat encounters are the hardest encounters most groups characters can consistently defeat. Most appropriate for important moments in your story, such as confronting a boss. Bad luck, poor tactics, or a lack of resources due to prior encounters can easily turn a severe threat encounter against the characters. This is already mentioning a chance of a TPK happening. Pretty seriously, where the Deadly one is lethal for one or more. This one's also very lethal for one or more. And it's saying it's the hardest they can consistently defeat with sound tactics. And so that final budget is for coin flipping TPKs, basically. Now, it isn't actually that bad. If your party is tactical and they're playing well, these probably can be taken down pretty simply. If they're full resources. And are playing well. And are knowing what to expect and are synergizing together and on top of their stuff. Like, it's not something you should do regularly. So as a GM that's new here, you should not be balancing with the idea of, well, Deadly just means something that the characters would beat up like several times per day, and then apply that to be like, well, Deadly's kind of like extreme. No. How 5e Deadly feels is how moderate feels here. So keep that in mind. Of Pathfinder fights, they're not balanced just to waste resources. They're balanced that if you don't spend your resources, you will TPK. So that's where the game gets its reputation as a much harder game. Because also a lot of new players will go and just think about their own character, not do any of the team play stuff, and then will get blown up by an encounter that is balanced because, like, severe means deadly, right? And then get blown out by severe encounter in their first run, then go, wow, this game's overly hard and stupid. So it's that mindset of, okay, we're a new group, we should actually start with moderate and low threat stuff. And a party can usually handle a lot of low threat trivial stuff per day, but only a couple severe threats per day. Simply due to how the spellcasters will need to spend a lot of slots in severe encounters, but barely need to spend anything in low or trivial threats. Because all of your in-combat healing takes resources. Out-of-combat healing's basically free, but in-combat healing, tough to come by. And the final way I'm going to mention the games are different is in how Pathfinder rewards tactical play. Because in D&D 5e, you really only have advantage, disadvantage, or roll extra dice and add it to the d20 roll. Because that's where you get things like Bardic Inspiration, Bless, a bunch of things that can break them out of the game by bringing your d20 rolls really, really high up. Pathfinder doesn't do that kind of thing. A lot of the conditions are things like Clumsy, which is a number that has it be a penalty equal to the value to dexterity stuff, including AC, etc. And there's a lot of these conditions that just apply these random -1s and -2s, and that doesn't seem that impactful if you're coming from the 5e mindset. It's like, okay, it's a 5% difference, whatever. And that's how a lot of people that are new to the game think about these little bonuses. And they're like, well, why would I spend 2 actions to apply Frighten to somebody when I can just try and hit them twice? You know? And there's a lot of players that come in with that mindset, but what you need to understand is that a +1 is about twice as valuable as it would be in 5e, because you're not only increasing your chance to hit, you're increasing your chance to crit. Because in Pathfinder, beating a DC by 10 has you crit even if the die roll is not a d20. And you can even crit in out-of-combat things like climbing, to climb faster, or other things of that nature. So as such, it becomes really, really important to get these conditions, particularly in boss fights, because every attack after the first will have a lower and lower accuracy, so you will want to spend more actions in boss fights to then debuff them, set up allies, and attack them yourself, and it leads to boss fights being a lot of, okay, so I'm going to do things, set up, okay, take my one-shot. Alright, and because all these monsters are still on them, the next person can go up, also do their thing, and you're all just trying to, like, stack your debuffs together and work together as a team, rather than all of you standing around in a circle and trying to just kick them to death. Ideally. However, again, that requires people to be building and playing into the team aspects of the game, which is the optimal way to play in terms of how often you can beat these fear encounters. But a lot of people do enjoy building the more selfish style characters because big numbers go burr. And quite frankly, that's kind of all some people need. And I understand, I am also a fighter main. So, a lot of these conditions here seem like a lot, but only like 5 or so come up in like actual play. Or come up that often. Only 5 come up that often. That's stuff like flat-footed, you see all the time. Frightened, you see very often. The rest of them are way less common, gonna be honest. So as long as you know flat-footed and frightened, you're pretty good. So, there are a lot of things here. This is only in social encounters. This is only involving player characters dying. This is only involving people who are trying to hide. So these are the actual conditions that matter in some way. It's honestly not that much after you start learning it. And if this seems intimidating for you, you can always have a note card up. And there are some like great resources and note cards made for this online. It is a bit more complicated, but that complexity then gives a ton of tactical depth under the hood. Because one of the things that frustrated me about 5e and made me want to switch is that you have advantage, then you kind of run out of things that you can do to make yourself better. And I really like the ability to set myself and my allies up and think a couple turns ahead and have that actually be rewarded by the game system, even when I'm playing the more simple classes. And by swapping to that style of mindset, I think that this game becomes a lot more enjoyable. It does have that little complexity hurdle to get over, though. At that's all I have for you today. Make sure to share this video with others if you liked it. And subscribe, because at 1,000 I can join Paizo's partner program and get books early to make wrestler builds. Again, not my problem, it's your problem. Alright. Fading to black.